welcome to another episode of A Breath of Fresh Marketing. I'm your host, Melissa Ciudakis, and today I'm here with Joshua McKenney. He is an independent artist and doll maker with an eye for feminine beauty. He's most known for his creation of the Pigeon Doll, a gorgeous brand of high-end art dolls. Each pigeon is handmade by Joshua himself, and the character has become a bit of a muse for makeup artists on social media. Hey, Joshua, how are you?
I'm great, Melissa. How are you doing?
I'm great. Well, thanks for joining. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, you said my name. My name is Joshua David McKenney. I am an independent artist. I live in Los Angeles. Pigeon Doll is a company that I run with my husband, who handles sort of more like the admin side of things, and it's sort of a joint effort that we do, but I'm the creative force behind it. And we've been doing it now for about 8 years. We've been doing Pigeon Doll.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's awesome. So according to your website, you worked in photography and fashion illustration before becoming a doll maker. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I moved to New York to go to art school, like pretty much right out of high school. And I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to study, but I knew that I loved fashion and I knew that I loved drawing and art and illustration. And so I originally went to study fashion design. And then I went into the photography program because I decided that I didn't want to learn how to sew, and I wanted to learn how to create images with photography. So I studied photography for a year, and then after I left school, I started illustrating, because I've always drawn all my life, and so I got an illustration agent and did that for about 8 years before I started doll making, and then it kind of Pigeon and everything that I do all kind of merged together into one art expression. So I could use my fashion design skills, my photography skills, my sculpting skills, my illustrative skills, and I'll kind of put them into one focus. So that's kind of the background of how I became the doll artist that I am.
Well, that's awesome. And you're completely self-taught, like making dolls. You just kind of started doing that one day. Like how'd you get started doing that? Were you like, I'm going to make a doll today? And just like,
yeah, it didn't take a day. I'd started seeing photos of dolls online that like Asian ball jointed dolls coming out of Asia. And there's another artist that was blogging a lot of the time named Marina Bichkova, who has a line of porcelain art dolls called Enchanted Dolls. And they're very much geared towards adults, and they're very elevated art expression. And it never occurred to me until I saw her work and saw these dolls coming out of Asia that a doll could be something so sophisticated and so grown up, and that it wasn't at all intended for children, or that wasn't the point, that a doll could be something really elevated. And it was really seeing her work that inspired me and made me want to start creating a doll of my own. And I'd always been interested in sculpture, but I'd never tried it before. So I took some classes at the School of Visual Arts in New York, where I was living at the time, and just on sort of like general mold making, how to make a silicone mold, how to cast in resin, that sort of thing, sort of with the hope of eventually teaching myself how to make a doll. And between that class, I took a ceramics class that was like, it was more based on pottery throwing and that sort of thing. But I knew Marina made porcelain dolls, so I wanted to learn how porcelain worked and how to fire things in a kiln and all that sort of thing. So my very first dolls were porcelain, but very simply articulated with like just a sculpted head and limbs, and then the body was fabric. And then I kind of just went from there and just started exploring different kinds of doll making until I found the way I wanted to do it.
Oh, that's awesome. What do you prefer, New York or LA?
Oh, I like them both. I mean, they're both, I moved to LA about 2 years ago, and it's been a great refreshing change of pace. And it's a really cool city, but I lived in New York for most of my life, and it's always like my, home city. So it's been hard this past 2 years. I haven't been able to go back as much, obviously, because travel isn't as easy anymore. So, but yeah, it's hard. They both have their flavors,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm in New York. I'm from New York, but I've also lived in other states, and then I came back to New York ultimately. So, Well, cool. Now, what are some of the common misconceptions about doll making and doll collecting?
I mean, I think one of the most common misconceptions about doll making is that I don't think anybody really understands how incredibly time consuming it is I mean, people always ask me like, how long does it take to make a doll? And that's not a real easy question to answer, but to like sculpt a doll with all the articulation and have it be exactly what you want before you make your molds can take years because there's just so much refining and every little, part matters. It just depends on, um, the type of doll that you're trying to make. But the most common misconception is that people think that it's something that I can do quickly because it's not, it's a very labor intensive act of love. I think that people also, I think because they're humanoid, people assume that there's sort of like an element of like creepiness or eeriness, or, I mean, a lot of people don't like dolls and that's fine. And I understand that, but it's just a valid art expression like anything. I mean, ultimately I'm a sculptor, and what I do is create three-dimensional artwork, and the expression and the output is dolls, but it's not any different than any other kind of work that any other kind of artist creates, like a painting or somebody that works in bronze or whatever,
Right.
it's the same thing.
Well, it's fascinating. I always loved any type of art because there's an art form involved and the creativity and creating of a doll and sculpting. It's just a really awesome thing. So
Thanks.
yeah, I'm very interested in it. So okay, on to the star of the show. Can you tell us about Pigeon?
Yeah, so Pigeon was like the third doll that I had ever sculpted. I followed another thing I should say about learning about doll making is I got this book that's based out of Japan called Yoshida Style Ball Jointed Doll Making that's written in Japanese but has a lot of photos, and a lot of people use that book when they're trying to figure out how to learn the basics of a doll, like the way I do, which is a ball jointed doll. So my first doll was the doll that I created using that book called Love Child. And then my second doll, and the one when I started experimenting with porcelain, was this sort of very elaborate mermaid ball jointed doll that had all these sort of different parts and a segmented tail. And you could kind of see through the tail and see sort of like her fish skin underneath. And she was kind of a weird concept, but she had a lot of parts. And when I came up with Pigeon, I'd kind of been, I wanted a doll that was much more simply engineered. So I wanted a doll that just had a really beautiful face that could change a lot with makeup, and I could sort of explore the things that I wanted to say about like feminine fashion and beauty and that sort of thing with this one sculpt. And so Pigeon was the third doll that I sculpted. I first cast her in porcelain, and she really originally was supposed to be sort of like, the way like Barbie is a character, or like trying to think of like another character doll. But like she was more of like a character that was a doll, but she was also very fluid, and she wasn't defined by like her race or a particular era that she's from or anything like that. But I mean, and she still is. Pigeon is the name of the sculpt of the doll, but there's no sort of backstory or group of friends or anything like that. I try to keep it very up for interpretation, because I think that people like to project themselves onto dolls, and so
Right.
the more vague you can sort of keep her storyline, the more creatively I feel liberated to do whatever I want with her. So she really became just the name for my muse, and then eventually the kind of the muse for other people as she started to take off on social media. And she was a doll that really grew up on social media. Like I started posting about the process sort of in the early days of Instagram. And I started an Instagram for Pigeon that was separate from my personal one, because I originally didn't want to bother my friends with doll stuff if they weren't interested in doll stuff. So I was like, okay, I'll make a separate Instagram account just for Pigeon, just so I'm not bothering my friends and the people that follow my two-dimensional artwork with doll stuff. And then her Instagram really started to take off, and people would recreate the looks that I was doing on the dolls and draw pictures of her like very, very quickly. And that really started teaching me about what what I was doing with Pigeon that was becoming definable to people. So I would see like, oh, she's becoming known for this little heart on her cheek, or she's becoming known for, she used to have a lot of like floral headdresses. So people would do pigeon looks, and I could see what people were recreating, what was sort of distinctive about her. And it was a really unusual way to create a sort of doll brand and a doll sort of aesthetic. But it was very much the sort of language between myself and the people that followed her, which is interesting because her name means language, like pigeon spelled that way, Pidgin. It means like a hybrid language, like when two people don't speak the same tongue and they find a way to communicate, that's a pigeon language. So, and she's the way that I communicate femininity. So it's the fact that her name means language, and she sort of is this sort of muse and muse about the language of style, or one language of style, that I think it's sort of interesting that it kind of came together that way.
Yeah, that is really cool. Do you have a pigeon doll around that you can show?
I do, yeah. I have one here next to me. I just released my last collection, and so I don't have a lot. I have new ones coming, but I did just finish. Here she is.
Wow.
So here's one here. So she's like a 16-inch ball jointed doll. So she's larger than like a Barbie. And this is like a little wig that I made and dyed myself. She's blue.
That's so
her color, her skin complexion is sort of like a light blue color. And yeah, and I produce all her clothes myself and do it all. Yeah.
What do you use for the hair color? How did you make the color like that?
So this wig is made out of alpaca. So it's actually an animal fiber, and because it's a natural fiber, you can use human hair dye on it. So, and I do a lot of videos and stuff where because I like hair color and I've always been interested in it, and so I create the wigs ahead of time, and then I sort of dye them on camera and sort of make a whole thing about it.
That's awesome. So what sets Pigeon apart from what people traditionally think of when they hear the word doll, for example?
I mean, I think especially in like our culture here in the United States is most people associate dolls with like mass production and things for children, and this sort of cheap disposable play item that, like, if it breaks, you just get another one. And Pigeon is very labor intensive, very valuable, very high end art expression. And so I think the first hurdle that people, when I meet people for the first time, the first thing that they kind of need to wrap their heads around is like, this is a different kind of doll. And it really, before mass production and plastics and things, dolls were always luxury items, and they were always, like porcelain dolls and things they were cherished and handed down from generation to generation. They were very like, they weren't something that you like cut the hair off and drew on with magic markers and that sort of stuff. So it's kind of the way I'm creating dolls and the way I think about dolls is more of like a throwback to that sort of idea that a doll is something really precious to be cherished for a long time, but also something to experience with your hands, and you can play with it. You can change the outfits, and like, it's not the kind of art that is untouchable either. There's this sort of interactiveness about it that I really enjoy, but it's a different sort of expression than most dolls here in the US.
What kind of comments did you get when she first debuted on Instagram? Like, what were people saying when you put the first one up?
It was all pretty positive. I think a lot of people, as I said, a lot of people were sort of, because I was making them in porcelain, so they were actually even more labor intensive than they are now. So I don't know if you know much about porcelain casting, but it takes like probably about a month before you finish casting something in a plaster mold, and before you can dry out the greenware, get it soft, sand it, then you have to fire it again, and then you have to do all the china painting, and it just takes a really, really long time. So when people would ask like, oh, how much would it be to make a doll? I think people were like, oh my God, because it's like, a month of work. And to be honest, like, I didn't really sell a lot of dolls then either. It was more, I was just making them like, I was working as an illustrator. So that was how I made money. And then the dolls were sort of my like side project. But I was noticing that I was just getting a lot more attention, but I was just standing out more as an artist by creating these dolls. And I really like, especially because I have a photography background, I love the idea of creating something three-dimensional and then interacting with it in the real world and photographing it. And making her emote like she's alive, and kind of using puppetry in that way. Because I love puppetry as well. I've always been interested in like marionettes and Jim Henson and the art of puppetry. So I feel like what I do is very adjacent to that.
Oh, cool. How much is a pigeon doll? If I were to buy one, what would you charge for something like that?
It depends on what. So the way I work now is I'm trying to work on like collections as opposed to taking custom orders. Each one is different, so it's kind of hard to say. And I'm coming out with different sculpts, and I'm always trying to come up with new products around pigeon at sort of different price points. But to answer your question, the last collection that I came out with, they all kind of ranged into like the 2K range for like a fully dressed finished doll. But sometimes it can go up a little bit more depending on if they have like really exquisite one of a kind outfits that I'm having made and really time consuming wigs. They can go up to like 3 or 4K.
Cool.
Yeah.
So what was your inspiration behind Pigeon's design? Like, was she based on a real face?
I wasn't really trying to, when I sculpted her, the idea behind her face is that I just wanted a face that was sort of ethnically ambiguous, that I could paint a lot of different makeup looks on and have it work. So her face is actually sculpted, not simply, but like it's sculpted with the idea that it's going to be painted on top of. So there's not a lot of definition in like her eyebrows or her eyelids or anything, because I want to be able to paint in that detail in different ways, depending on how I'm sculpting her. And a lot of people don't even understand that the pigeon doll sculpt is all the same doll. It's just different colors, different ways of painting it. So that was sort of the main thing behind sculpting her that way. That said, as a teenager, my two main obsessions were Kate Moss and Bjork. Mm-hmm. I grew up in like rural Pennsylvania, and I poured over like fashion and music magazines, and those are sort of my two muses. And Kate Moss in particular, just because she more than any other model at the time, she really like morphed how she looked. And I loved that. I loved that she could be sort of ultra glamorous, but then also look very impish, and then also look very sort of like gritty and grungy. And she just always pulled them off really well. Yeah. And she always looked different depending on what photo you had of her. And there was a makeup artist that it was and am still into, named Kevin Aquan, who had some books called The Art of Makeup, where he would use makeup to make celebrities look like other celebrities. So he would do like Lisa Marie Presley as Marilyn Monroe, or like different sort of things, but he'd use makeup to morph the face. And I loved that. I thought that was so fascinating. So somebody said to me once that, like her face sculpt kind of looks like a combination of like Kate Moss and Bjork, which makes sense. I wasn't trying to at the time, but those were sort of my teen muses. But ultimately, yeah, she was just sort of sculpted to be as fluid as possible within one sculpt of a doll. And then her sort of like figure and silhouette. I've always loved ballet dancers, and I love the fairies from Fantasia, the very sort of like long, leggy, sort of like nymph-like creature. So she's sort of like in that spirit a little bit as far as her figure goes. But she's changing and she morphs, and in the past 2 years, I've experimented with different body types for her and different sculpts where like her head is really big and she has a little chibi body. So I'm playing around with like how far I can take like the pigeon aesthetic into other sorts of silhouettes, but she always has the same sort of like wide set eyes and the same sort of kind of aesthetic feeling around her.
Yeah, no, it's funny too, because the other day I was looking through an old magazine and there was a picture of Kate Moss in there, and it was when they try to make her look a little like grungy picture. And I remember her in her modeling days, like Kate Moss was like it.
Yeah, she was everywhere. She was everywhere.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, Kate Moss. I had like my moment of appreciating and remembering how I used to, always admired Kate Moss. So that's. Yeah. So you had mentioned earlier about pigeon being an expression of your feminine self. What would you say femininity means to you?
What does femininity mean to me? So I often say that I kind of consider what I do in my work with dolls and my work with Pigeon as sort of a drag expression. I think it sort of fills that. I know, like I have a lot of friends that are professional drag queens, and we have this sort of kindred spirit where it's this female avatar, female personification that we get power from. And so the things that I want to say about femininity usually have to do with sort of like gracefulness and gentleness and like, but also like the power and the glam and the power and that sort of like heightened femininity. But I don't really have any desire to put that on my physical body. So I sort of use dolls and like puppetry as a way to do that. Um, I've all of my life I've always been interested in anything feminine. So, you know, when I was like 2 or 3 years old, I was always drawing like ballerinas and Miss Piggy and mermaids and princesses, and it's not necessarily about women per se, but like it's just about this sort of, it's not, I've just never been interested in anything masculine at all. And 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 so yeah, that kind of just comes out in the dolls, especially. It's like the ultimate expression for that. It's the way I can say, talk about my own femininity and the images that I wanted to see. I turned to drawing. I grew up in a conservative home, and I wasn't really allowed to play with dolls or watch girls shows or anything like that, but I was allowed to draw. So all of the sort of femininity that I felt inside of me got channeled into art, into drawing. And that was the only way I was allowed. And so I've always been known as like Josh draws girls. Like, people would always ask me why I don't draw other things, and I never really had a solid answer. I was like, I don't know. I just don't want to. I was telling this story the other day. I remember I was drawing with a little friend of mine. I was probably like 3 or 4 years old, and his mother came up and she's like, Josh, you always draw girls and women. You really need to draw something masculine. You're a boy. And I was drawing like a mermaid or a fairy or something. I remember I took the piece of paper, I pulled it off to the side, I took a new piece of paper, and I tried to think of like the most masculine thing that would take the least amount of time to draw for her, so she'd leave me alone. So I drew a nail and a hammer, and I just gave it to her. And then I like pulled my paper over and I started drawing my princess again. But I don't know, it's just always been this like really strong need in me, and it came out in art, and that just kind of like locked in and became who I am as an artist.
So when I used to draw, and I could only draw women. I could not
Yeah.
draw men. I tried to draw men. I gave it a whirl, but it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And because I used to try to take pictures at the magazine. So I Drew Barrymore when she used to model. Yes. I tried to do that one. I drew like Linda Evangelista, like, and it was easier to just kind of replicate those pictures of them in my sketchbook, but I could not draw men at all.
No, totally. It's the same. It's funny. I find that most artists that I meet either kind of go one way or the other in regards to like what the way they draw, if it has a sort of more feminine slant or a more masculine slant. And even if they do draw both sexes, or there is sort of a perspective on it, there's still, even if they draw women, they're kind of more, they kind of feel more masculine. I feel like every artist sort of has their direction that they go. But that's interesting. I've met a lot of artists that either can't draw women or can't draw men.
That's funny.
And but even within that, they always sort of do their own interpretations of that. I know, like, cis straight male artists that can only draw women, but the women that they draw have a sort of like, they're based on like their sexuality a little bit. So they have a really different sort of take on femininity, even though they still don't draw men, even though it's not like a queer expression for them the way it is for me. It's but that's still their like where they stick. So it's just kind of depends on the artist.
Yeah, for sure. Your favorite artist?
Who's my favorite artist?
Yeah.
I have so many. I love like sort of the golden age of illustration. So I love like Kay Nielsen, and Aubrey Beardsley is a big favorite of mine. I'm a big, I have a dear friend of mine who's also a doll maker, doll artist, and also an illustrator named Mel Odom, who happens to be a friend of mine, is also really one of my favorite artists ever. I'm trying to think who else. Yeah, it just depends on what kind of art. Marina Bichkova, the artist I told you about, and her dolls. She really changed my life, and her work. I really kind of consider her like the mother of like the modern doll artist. She was really the first one that I knew that used the internet to talk about doll making, and I think she changed a lot of people's minds as to what a doll could be, which is really cool. So yeah, she's definitely one of my favorite artists too.
Nice.
Mhm.
So, Pigeon inspired a lot of makeup looks and fan art across
Mhm.
Instagram as well as YouTube makeup tutorials. How do you feel about that?
Oh, it's Pigeon's makeup looks have been, or like people recreating Pigeon's makeup looks have been, I think, the most incredible thing to happen to me as an artist. Um, it's been going on now for so many years that like it's not that I'm used to it. Every time I see one, I'm like, I can't believe people are doing this still. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's like it's this way that I see that people can communicate to me that my artwork resonates with them in this way that's like not, it's so much different than like a letter being like, oh hey, I really like your art. Like, to the fact that someone sees something that I create, feels identity in it and enough to be like, I'm going to paint myself blue and then paint stars all over my face. That's like that's like hours of work. That's a lot of commitment, and people do it and a lot. And it's yeah, it's just very like humbling and cool. And yeah, I don't know. It feels just like the best thing that ever happened to me as an artist, and I'm grateful every time I see it. I could have never expected it when I was doll making that it would like turn into that people would start like taking my dolls and dressing up as them. But yeah, it's just been the coolest thing ever.
Well, you have a second character that you created
Hmm.
aside from Pigeon. So it's Bleu, right?
Blue, yeah. Hmm. So she's a little bit more elusive. So I created Blue about 2 years ago, and essentially the idea behind her, and with Pigeon, even though she's very fluid in how she looks and she changes a lot, her face is very like heart shaped,
Mhm,
and everything about her is very sort of bright and kind of funky, but like she's very bright.
mhm.
She's never melancholy. And I was looking through old sketchbooks of mine, and especially ones that sort of like before I was like fully like out of the closet and dealing with my own sort of inner demons. And I was drawing a lot of these like sad, melancholy girls. And I thought they were really beautiful. And I was like, oh yeah, that doesn't fit into Pigeon anymore. Like that's a different girl. Who
Mhm.
is that? And so I started thinking about that. And I had all these different names for her, but essentially I knew I wanted to take the idea that Pigeon's her face is heart shaped, and I wanted to make a doll that was more like tear shaped. So everything about her is more like rounded at the bottom. And so it's like you turn the heart upside down almost. And so she's sort of fuller in the cheeks. Her eyes are downturned. She's more like, uh, and yeah, and her general mood is a little more like melancholy, less, less bright. And so yeah, so that was sort of the idea behind her. I changed her body a little bit. So Blue's aesthetic was it's kind of 1920s inspired. It's kind of 1960s inspired. And she's just sort of supposed to be like sort of the melancholy like, art expression, but she's not like a sidekick or like a friend of or anything like that. It's just but she is in the Pigeon Doll universe. You know, she still sort of exists in that world. She's not a completely different entity, but she's very elusive. Actually just did a video with her today. But I haven't really posted about her probably in like a month or two. So she's definitely not as outgoing as Pigeon Doll. She's much more melancholy and reserved and that sort of stuff. So
Okay.
yeah, I mean, you know, she she just keeps coming up in different places, and I keep kind of learning about her as I explore it. But Pigeon's definitely sort of the main muse, and then Doll Blue is the one that visits every once in a while, but she wants to be alone a lot.
Is Blue around or is
Yeah, I have one over here. I have to roll over and get her. So I just I just shot a video where I dyed her hair. I actually just posted it right before this interview, and I dyed her hair, and then I like the color combination that I dyed my hair the same thing. So we have the same hair color combination. But this is Doll Blue.
Oh wow! Look at her, beautiful.
So as you can see, her eyes are more sort of downturned. She still wears like a lot of makeup.
Yeah, really cool.
You know, there you can hear I can hold them together.
Oh yeah, they're totally different.
Just very different in how their faces are shaped and everything.
Oh yeah, yeah, I can see that. So since you first started your brand, what would you say your favorite collection is to work on?
I always tell people that my favorite doll is always like the doll that I'm currently working on, which is true. It's just the one that I'm interested in. As soon as I'm finished with the doll, and I have her photographed and she's sort of out there in the world, I stop thinking about her and then I'm on to the next one. There's been a few that were sort of formative, so I guess those stand out to me as favorites. I did a doll called, her name is Theta, and she was for a 1920s themed convention. And I actually used the Pigeon Doll sculpt because it was before I did Doll Blue. But she was just really special. And it was the first time I'd used Pigeon in stop motion animation. So I had a friend of mine who is a professional stop motion animator. We wired the dolls and we created a little set for her and did this whole little 30-second movie where she sort of puts on her makeup and she's getting ready to go on stage. And I've always loved the 1920s, and it was just a sort of a standout doll. I just really like the way she looks, and so she stands out to me as being particularly special. I did a collection called the Bon Collection, which was sort of like a modern Marie Antoinette Rococo style thing. So they had these big powdered wigs, and it was the first time that I'd really gotten experimental with my wig making and tried unconventional materials to make some pretty outlandish doll wigs. So that was really fun too. And I flew out here to Los Angeles for DesignerCon for that collection, and so I debuted it at DesignerCon, and that one stands out to me as particularly good too. But yeah, it's weird. Like I'll go through my Instagram and stuff, and there's dolls that I forget about. There's dolls like, I'm like, oh wow, that one was really cool. I'm very focused on whatever I'm just doing now, and I don't really reflect a lot on the past.
When you were just talking about the conference, it was making me think of Comic-Con.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Comic-Con and I was thinking showcasing something like Pigeon and Blue at Comic-Con, I think would be like huge. Is that something where you'd be interested in doing something like that if you were able to? Or do you feel like it's a totally different type of genre and everything, and you don't want to be kind of mixed in with like the comics and the superheroes and all of that? But it's a very serious group of people. Like Comic-Con is,
Yeah, no, I've been to Comic-Con a few times, and DesignerCon it's in the same model, but it's more about designers and creators. But there's still a lot of like superheroes in that space, and
right.
With my work, I would love to answer your. I would love to do that with Pigeon Doll and with Doll Blue, and do something at like a Comic-Con. I feel like where I'm at right now, because I'm hand making everything, and there's such small quantities of what I'm making, that it's not like, I feel like a lot of people would go there wanting to buy something from me, and I don't have anything really mass produced right now. That might be something that I'd like to work towards as Pigeon Doll is becoming more popular, and I feel like I have an audience for that. But to create a less expensive doll takes, you need to be able to do really big numbers of dolls to create them and be able to sell them. And I haven't been confident with my like moderate audience size, because I'm an independent, that I would be able to sell like, $5,000 or $10,000 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But as I kind of move towards, that sort of thing, my audience is growing. I'd like to do that someday, but I'm not super interested in doing dolls of licensed properties or characters that already exist, just because unless I can do like my own spin on it, or it feels sort of authentic to like where Pigeon Doll comes from, then I would. But it's a very personal art expression for me, so I don't like to mix it too much with like existing things like that. And that's a lot of what happens in that world over there. It's a lot of superhero and fandom and that sort of thing.
Right.
And I kind of like to stick to my own lane and keep it fashiony and femme and that sort of thing.
You'd have to do a lottery, and whoever that one person was who won the lottery would have to pay you to design the custom doll that they wanted.
Yeah. I haven't done I was doing custom dolls for a while, and like people would choose like the complexion color and the makeup look and the wig, and we'd have special dresses made for each doll, and it's really fun to do. And it was really fun because I got to take Pigeon in all these different directions that I maybe wouldn't have done on my own. So we did like a Jean Harlow pigeon, or a 1940s like war era pigeon, and I did a Marie Laveau pigeon, and I did well, this wasn't a custom doll, but it was like a Jane Eyre style, like Empire waist, doll blue, and like to take her in all these different directions is really, really fun. But it got to be more, especially as my schedule is getting busier and busier, and then I do a lot on social media now. So a lot of my time is spent making videos and creating video content that I'm just not able to put the time into helping people like create their doll dreams anymore. So I'm trying to just keep it and focused on what I'm doing.
Yeah.
The things the dolls that I want to make right now.
And there's like this huge market even for kids on YouTube, like using your dolls just to like have them walk around and pretend, like talk, stuff like that. There's just this huge following. There's kids love that kind of stuff too. I feel like everybody can appreciate your doll no matter what age you are. Whether you're really young, whether you're an adult, whether you're older, there's collectors out there been collecting for years. It's really cool to have an authentic doll created. It's like, you can put it up on a shelf and nice,
Thanks. Yeah, I try really hard to, although my dolls are at a price point that not a lot of people can afford, I try to make the expression as accessible as possible. So, and as like family friendly as possible. So anybody who's interested in art and doll making can like watch my content and sort of experience the dolls through social media. I put a lot of energy into that just because I want as many people as possible to be able to appreciate them, even though they are like a very high-end item.
Yeah, definitely. Are you working on any new designs or upcoming collections that you can share?
I am nothing that I can share visually because they're not finished yet, and I don't want to spoil the surprise. But I'm working on. I posted about it like a few months ago. A collection of like pink poodle inspired dolls. So that'll be the next collection that I'm coming out with. It's called the Poodle Collection, and they're all pink, monochromatic pink and black poodle looks. So they have poodle-y face. Their faces are human face, like that's a Pigeon Doll sculpt, but I paint sort of like a little poodle makeup on them, and they have sort of poodle shaped hair and little fun canine accessories and that sort of stuff. So I think it'll be a really fun, like sort of next level collection for me. So that'll probably be next. And I have some other collaborations and things kind of in the works as well. So yeah, you can see a little bit of what's going on behind me here, but it's I'm juggling a lot of new projects. So yeah, there's lots of fun stuff coming up for sure.
Cool. And where can everyone find you on social media?
So you can find I'm on Instagram at Pigeon Doll, spelled PIDGINDOLL. And then my personal Instagram, I also, at this point, it's very doll content related too, but it's more about like behind the scenes and what I'm working on and my personal life. So that's just my name. So just the letter J and then David McKenney. And then I'm on TikTok at Pigeon Doll. And that's, if you follow me on TikTok or follow me on Instagram, the TikTok and Instagram, it's a lot of the same content, but there's some stuff that's only on one or only on the other. So, and I have a YouTube that I'm trying to keep stuff up on, but it's hard with all the other content, to produce YouTube videos and TikTok videos and Instagram videos and actually make the work. And, and I shoot everything myself. So I light it and I do the voiceovers and I do the music. And so it's just very, I haven't been able to do YouTube too much, but yeah, I would say Instagram and TikTok are the best places to find me.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of work, and hopefully you're finding some time to sleep and enjoy doing other things, of course.
I do. I do my best. I feel very lucky to be a working artist and to be doing what I've always dreamed of. And so I put a lot of energy into that, but it's when you zoom out, it's very rewarding. I feel very blessed.
That's
But
great.
I am busy all the time. Yeah.
Well, your creations are beautiful, and I'm excited to see what you have in store for the future. And thanks so much for joining today. And I wish you the best of luck.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thanks. And thank you everyone at home or wherever you are for tuning in to another episode of A Breath Fresh Marketing. I'm Melissa Siudakis, and we'll talk to you soon.